Hi, I'm Greg Moores, and welcome to Life Camp, where you'll meet amazing people for an amazing life. Are you stuck? Feel like you're just play acting? Like someday people are going to find out you're just pretending to be an adult? You could be a parentified child. Today we've got a guest who's going to explain to us what this means, why it matters, and what to do about it. Dr. James Gagne, Dr. Jim Gagne, is a physician specializing in internal medicine. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Parentified child. Now, you say there's both good news and bad news when it comes to parentified child. So please tell us what this is and why it matters.
You betcha. Parentified child is something that occurs in certain situations in dysfunctional families. And what's come to me is that it's a wonderful expression of what is wrong when we grow and mature emotionally as adults to a certain point and then freeze, and then we're stuck.
So a parentified child is like a dysfunction.
Right.
So what's the good news?
The good news is that although there's no model in our culture for what to do next, you know, adults, you kind of reach the age of 35, 39, and then, oh, I guess you get old. But in fact, there is something to do more. There is a way to grow up that profoundly changes this, where you get to the point of feeling totally comfortable, passionate, and alive within your own skin. And that's the good news. And this isn't hard. It takes work, but it's doable.
Great. So what is a parentified child?
A parentified child comes out of situations in the chemical dependency world and some other situations where people who have had children and are acting as parents can't play the parent role. They might be working 3 jobs. Classically, it happens where one of the parents is alcoholic or an addict and they're zoned out. They can't raise their kids. So one of the kids in the household, and you know, often it's the oldest girl, but it can be anybody, winds up being mommy or being daddy. And everybody in the neighborhood says, man, little Mary or little Johnny is doing a great job taking care of the whole family. Man, isn't she a hero? And little Mary is walking around trying to be a hero, and it doesn't work because little Mary's a kid. She's always going to be a day late and a dollar short.
So these are adult children.
These are kids who are acting as parents, but pedaling as fast as they can to keep this veneer going and keeping the act up, and periodically it falls through. Now, of course, when you're a parentified child, you can't tell the truth. You can't really pay attention to what's going on. You can't pay attention to your own sense of self. You don't have time to grow up. You don't have time to meet your own needs, and nobody is out there supporting you in that. So you hit age 15, 20, 22, all of a sudden you've got an empty nest. There's nobody who needs you to be their parent anymore. And you've got this superficial ability to be an adult and this emotional morass underneath this turmoil. Periodically it breaks through in eruptions.
Because you resent not having a childhood?
That, because you never learned what's really going on. You never had the resources to deal with the emotion stuff.
So being thrown into a position where all of a sudden you have to be an adult causes some form of, like I've got a fraud or something.
It makes people act in a way that they can't keep up. No kid can be an adult. They can't really do it.
I see. So they're pretending to be an adult.
And carrying it off sometimes.
And carrying it off sometimes. So they're just putting on the act, but they don't really have the maturity or the quality that it takes, or the characteristics and qualities that it takes to be a parent.
Right. And if they ever feel something deeply, it becomes overwhelming immediately.
Great. So they're living an act.
Right.
And it starts in childhood, and then they got to live it the rest of their life.
Well, the longer they get into adulthood, the more it starts to break down.
Because?
Because they don't have the resources. They haven't learned how to be a real person. The whole thing was phony.
Well, wait a minute. I thought you said they're learning to do things that other children, you know, it sounds like they're doing very mature things that other children wouldn't even do at that age.
Exactly. But they aren't adults. They aren't parents. And so the way they learn it is through the whole thing's phony. It just doesn't add up.
So they're functioning on a high level externally, but internally, emotionally, they're breaking down.
Right. And it's a little bit like driving a 1946 Cadillac that keeps coughing and sputtering, but boy, the thing looks great from just the right angle, but the whole thing is, you know, the wheel falls off, you get out, put it on, and then the steering wheel falls off, get off, put that back on. So there's constant things to keep this bucket of bolts running.
So why is this a problem? What kind of impact is this having on society?
Well, what I'm saying is this notion of this poor person. And, some parentified children get their act together, grow up, and they're fine. And a lot really struggle with emotions they don't know what to do with. I think that fits what happens to a lot of us. And this comes out of the men's movement, and I just found this whole thing really compelling. It spoke to me about my own journey. It speaks to what my patients are going through. And, classically, men grow up really wearing their emotions on their sleeve. They are just out there. They're really, if you have...
Courageous,
well,
heroic.
No, they've got a chip on their shoulder.
Right.
So
Okay.
if you talk about 16-year-olds and 14-year-olds and so forth, adolescent men typically are all about emotion and all about just letting it hang out and making everybody responsible for their emotions.
That's surprising to hear.
Well, obviously this is a stereotype, so
Got it. Okay.
but bear with me for a moment. So for a lot of teenagers, what do you think about with teenagers? Folks who are acting out emotionally and expressing themselves fully and completely, and sometimes making faux pas. Sometimes
they're putting on a show. They're trying to be impressive.
Yeah, but there's very little emotional regulation. When they get upset, everybody knows it.
Yeah, they explode.
All right. So this gets old because it turns out you can't really rely on these guys because as soon as they get upset, they lose it until they kind of blame everybody, pull it all back together again, and go on. And it's kind of hard to function as an adult in that way.
So they end up in society turning into what?
Well, then they go on to the next stage because I call the first stage Rambo. Just wearing your emotions on your sleeve, and I'm going to walk around here, and everybody's going to know what I'm feeling, and I'm right, and so forth. Well, that doesn't last very long. That's pretty immature. So the next stage is what some people think of as John Wayne, where you stuff the emotions, you bring them inside, and the problem is you kind of become paralyzed.
So, how so? John Wayne is paralyzed? Or you mean so he's kind of like stoic?
Well, most people can't pull off the John Wayne thing and actually wind up shutting down completely, turning into Dagwood.
Dagwood. So start as Rambo, go through John Wayne phase, and then you end up as Dagwood. And
I'm not sure John Wayne is a phase most people can carry off. I think most of us go from Rambo to Dagwood.
Rambo to Dagwood. And who's
You bet.
Dagwood?
Dagwood is your guy who goes to work, Joe Sixpack, goes to work.
Workaholic.
Well, not necessarily, but goes to work, puts in a good, tries to do the best thing he can, comes home, and all these people are needing him and so forth, and he kind of is shut down, doesn't know how to handle it. And the classically, emotionally shut down, unresponsive man, and when he does express his emotions, everybody's mad at him. So if he's quiet and just does his job and just tries to serve his family, everybody's wondering, where is this guy? We got a robot here.
Right, very common. So this is the guy who tries to show his family he loves them by working harder instead of spending more time with them.
And the classic dad who's unable to really be expressive and loving to his children.
Great.
And about the only way he can show his love is periodically blow up.
Great. So what do we do with this?
Well, I'm saying that most people reach that second stage of learning to control their emotion, and you have to. I mean, if you can't control your emotion, you can't function as an adult. But that's not enough. And once you've learned how to control your emotion, there's a third step that most of us don't know about, where you integrate the emotions at a different level, in almost a transformative way. So the emotion becomes you in a different way. You open up, you turn on to the emotion, not that you explode like a volcano or you suppress it, but that you open up to the emotion in a whole new way.
So this isn't Rambo or John Wayne or Dagwood. Who is this?
Well, probably the closest character, and I use this in discussing, for instance, anger. Anger is an emotion in our culture that most people don't like.
Right.
If you're a man who's angry, you're violent. If you're a woman who's angry, well, then you're castrating, and there's some other not nice words for that too. Right. But what if you integrate anger in a different way and pull it in and become fully informed of the anger and have the energy without it exploding or acting out, where you've, in a sense, transformed the energy? My model for that, and I don't know anything about this woman other than what I've read in the press, Mother Teresa. And this was a woman who, if you got anywhere near her, she put you to work, and you worked gladly because her passion carried you through.
Got it.
So Mother Teresa was somebody who, it wasn't anger energy, it was something much more profound than that. It was a kind of a fire. And what I would propose is anger and fire are very closely related, but when you're immature, when you haven't learned how to integrate the anger, it either explodes or you have to suppress it because it's bad to be angry, and so you don't have access to it.
Got it. So Mother Teresa wasn't so much, you wouldn't say she was an angry woman, you'd say she was a passionate woman who learned to channel her intolerance into a contribution?
I wouldn't call it channeling intolerance. I would say that she worked on herself spiritually to a point where something that you and I might find is anger, frustration, resentment, bitchiness, all that stuff, in her became, here's my purpose, here's the reason why I'm on the earth, and I'm going to do this, would you like to help me? And it was very compelling for other people to do that. And the point is, it's not anger itself, it's the force that's beneath that, it's the fire, the red heat, but very strong, very powerful.
Great. And you have a couple of slides here that exemplify what this...
I want to get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
Because I want to set up an idea that there are actually 4 possible stages of maturity.
Okay.
The first is childhood, where we just are little kids and we're dependent on other people and we're learning how to get along. Then there's adulthood, which I'll call young adulthood, where as an adult, until the time you retire, you are your role.
Okay.
You're whatever profession you are, doctor, lawyer, whatever. Your roles in the family, in the community, in your church, and so forth. Then pretty much people keep that up until those roles gradually fall away. They become retired. And for a lot of people in our culture, they don't have anything to replace that. So things gradually just kind of fall off. And they can play a while, but you can only play so many rounds of golf and take so many trips, and it's like, been there, done that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I call that kind of getting older, or retirement, or senescence, just kind of where you're kind of waiting for, well, what do we do now? But there's another kind of maturity, which I'm talking about today, which I think happens after the age of 40 for most people. Some people do it before, but I think for most people after the age of 40. And something else shifts. Now, one of the places where you see this, and it's about the only place in our culture where it's common, is in people in 12-step programs, particularly Alcoholics Anonymous. I got involved in treating alcoholics because I met a guy coming into my practice 30 years ago who said, oh, by the way, Doc, I'm a drunk, I've been sober for a while, I've worked with a lot of people, and just wanted you to know that. Don't give me any mind-altering drugs.
Got it.
And there was something about this guy I wanted. It just drew me to him. So, we got to know each other a little bit. And he was just this little guy in his 70s who, you wouldn't pick him out in a crowd in a heartbeat, but he radiated this kind of warmth and affection.
So
that
he
was
had this
incredibly
quality
compelling.
of having internalized his anger and created maturity out of that.
I think so.
Okay, so say more.
And you see this in a bunch of people who've worked hard on themselves in 12-step programs. So, what is this? How do you get at that? What does this mean? And, the guys in the 12-step program say, look, I'm just trying to stay sober. That's my goal, is not to drink.
Okay.
So, let's contrast, if we can, what this special kind of maturity is and how it's different from young adulthood and just retiring and kind of having stuff fall off.
So this is called
extraordinary maturity.
Okay.
It's extraordinary in the sense that we don't have much of it in our culture.
I see.
But I think, in fact, it's part of the human equipment. I think this is part of who we can be, all of us.
If you were going to define extraordinary maturity in one sentence, what would you say it is?
I haven't a clue. I don't know how to do it.
It's so nebulous.
No, it's subtle.
Subtle?
Yeah. There are a couple of one-sentence descriptions. As a young adult, most of us are out there looking for something that we don't know what it is. We're looking for somebody to feed us, or to take care of us. We're looking for the right job, the right house, the right external symbol.
I can relate.
And so there's this neediness that you've got to do something because
you got to do something to be someone.
Yeah.
Or to feel like you're someone anyway.
And with extraordinary maturity, rather than looking to be fed, you become source. You actually, the flame lights, and you actually light other people's way, and it flows out of you. So extraordinary maturity is moving from needing to be fed to becoming source and connecting with your own maturity. Another way of saying it is extraordinary maturity means moving beyond fear into a kind of a fearlessness that is accepting of your fear and of your own human foibles.
I see.
So there's a deep self-acceptance in that as well. And
So you haven't overcome your fear, but you've embraced it.
Right.
Got it. So that's extraordinary maturity, is embracing life as opposed to having it figured out and working.
Yep.
Fantastic.
So let's take a look at the first slide.
Okay. So our first slide is going to be...
This is Ken and Barbie at the Waltz. And it's kind of pretty, but because they're dolls and toys, it's also kind of phony. Here's the next version of what Barbie really turns into if she's trying to meet those needs: addiction. And then here's my favorite thing coming up next, which this looks good, but it's actually all the ways in which you don't measure up. It's all the things that, in ways in which you failed. So finally we move into the fire, the passion. Now it looks like it's consuming the rose, but in fact it comes out of, and the rose exudes it. So it consumes the rose, and yet as the rose becomes consumed, it grows bigger.
So when you talk about parentified child, that's the stage where out of survival we take on this first sort of facade of living.
It's where the adult pretends to be an adult,
okay,
and gets all the skills necessary to
right.
Balance your checkbook, raise a kid, get married, have a job, drive a car.
Which is so painful they end up taking on some kind of addiction.
For sure.
Okay.
But it doesn't satisfy because it's like there's still this real neediness. There's
the addiction doesn't satisfy, or that lifestyle of being rich and fulfilled?
The addiction is an answer, I think, to the feeling of being empty.
Right.
How do you address feeling empty? And so I would propose that when you start integrating this stuff, the emptiness gets filled. And the way it gets filled is, of course, by heading into the emptiness.
By sourcing.
Right.
Becoming the source of...
Becoming the source.
Great.
And the way you become the source is by going into the pain. And we'll talk about that next time. But
well, you and I have both worked with people with addictions.
We
and
have.
I've always felt that when somebody has an addiction, it's because they took a drug, whether it was sex, narcotics, alcohol, whatever, because they were in pain. So it's always to kill a pain. The pain that they're trying to kill is emptiness. And they wouldn't feel that emptiness if they didn't have some kind of conviction for life to be working out, right?
yes.
So would you say that people that are actually that are addicts, because you mentioned you go through a 12-step program and you become more mature, I actually believe that people that have had or are struggling with an addiction have a greater potential, or at least a greater drive, to experience this extraordinary maturity than someone that's just comfortable with a mediocre job.
Well, one of the things I tell my patients about this is that the essence of addiction is having your head up your butt.
The essence of addiction is having your head up your butt.
Pretending that everything is okay in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's not. And so if you're going to get treatment from addiction, you've got to get your head out of your butt. That's the only way it's going to work. And that involves growing up.
Have you personally wrestled with an addiction?
I have not.
So
I have lots of other issues, but for me, there's this overwhelming feeling of, there but for the grace of God go I. I have my other issues, but it's something where I just feel an incredible infinity with people. It's like, it really is real for me, what the struggles people go through. Now, I'm a card-carrying example of somebody who could never be a drunk, because when I drink, it's annoying and obnoxious. I never get high or anything else like that, so I don't go there.
Painful for you.
It's just unpleasant.
So the reason you work with people in addiction is because you've actually experienced that pain, that level of pain.
Indeed. And also, this little guy 30 years ago, it's like, yes,
Sure.
this is possible. So it's kind of like, it's almost like he gave me a torch, and it's my job to go around and light the lights of some of the other folks I meet. And that's a lot harder than it sounds.
Who is that little guy?
The one I was talking about before, who had been in AA for a while.
Got it.
And was, he walked into my office and I felt blessed.
What did he do for you?
Nothing. In terms of he walked in and gave me $100, no.
Did he give you permission to be someone?
He showed me a possibility.
Because of who he was being?
Yes.
So he didn't say to you, here's a possibility for you, Jim.
Not at all. He just told me who he was.
And that's what you're calling extraordinary maturity?
Yes.
So did he overcome his parentified child? Did he raise him? Did he conquer him? How does this process work?
The process works by addressing the fact that emotions are something we fear in traditional culture and cover up in the same way that, you know, the Barbie pictures and that, you know, if you eat the right foods and lose enough weight, you'll be okay. But what all that is about is trying not to feel, trying not to be present, and trying not to be in yourself.
Got it, got it.
And so when you train people how to be present in themselves and to go through radical acceptance, which is something we'll talk about next show, then a transformation happens and people become happy within themselves.
Okay. So we've got a few more minutes. And I want you to just wrap up for us. What is, if you were to take this through a process, so here's a person, they're watching the show, and they're thinking to themselves, oh my God, that's me. I'm a parentified child. I'm still struggling with my pain. Maybe they're either starting an addiction or at the end of an addiction. What is, and you mentioned the 12-step program, is that what you're promoting as the solution to this? Or what? Because it sounds like what you're saying is not a 12-step program.
What I'm saying is not a 12-step program. For those for whom 12-step programs are appropriate, 12-step programs can get you there. And we'll talk in the next show about specific ways to do this. So what I'm saying is that most of us freeze halfway through growing up because there isn't the structure and support in our culture to help us move on.
Okay.
And so we feel like we've achieved what we're supposed to achieve, but it doesn't work.
And this ends up, the people that know that this is them are feeling stuck. They're feeling like they're a phony.
Right.
And they're pretending to be grown up, but they know inside themselves that they're mature.
And there's this sense that there's something more, and there's a sense of a deep hurt that you can't quite define and get at, but there's a sense that it might explode one day and take over.
And you're describing that hurt as emptiness.
Yes.
A feeling of emptiness.
And more.
And
missing something. You really want something.
It's
you feel incomplete.
It's a real paradox. It's like an emptiness, but like you said, it's exploding. We're afraid that it's going to explode. So
Yes.
it's almost like it's going to fill us up too fast, too soon.
Well, it'll be overwhelming because it's strong emotion.
Right.
So it's sadness, anger, fear, take over, make us blah, 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 blah.
We'll go crazy or break down, or there'll be nothing left of us.
But there is a way out of this. And we'll talk about that in the next show. And it really works.
And the way out is extraordinary maturity.
Extraordinary maturity.
Okay, so start out as a parentified child. If you are a parentified child, you will probably be a Rambo or something like that.
Rambo and parentified child are different. Rambo is the rebel. Usually the sister or brother of the parentified child.
Okay. Oh, I see.
They're different roles.
Okay, all right.
The parentified child is the one who walks around and tells people what to do.
Right, little kid that's
right.
got it.
The little Miss Mary boss.
Okay.
Or whatever.
And so how does Rambo and these other phases get formed?
Rambo gets humiliated a few times by acting like a jerk and winds up going to the Dagwood phase because it's like, man, I can't do this anymore. Because Rambo doesn't have the resources to incorporate emotion and just shuts down.
And in all these cases, extraordinary maturity is the answer.
It's what gets you out of there. Now, Rambo can't process extraordinary maturity. Rambo's got to learn how to control emotion. But the extraordinary maturity is on the other side of that. Now, again, you'd say, well, in 12-step people, a lot of addicts and alcoholics are still in the Rambo stage. And yeah, you kind of have to work through that and do some releasing and surrendering. But eventually you get to the point where, wait a minute, I want to heal. I want to feel like a human being. I want to be real.
And that's the bottom line. If you're at that place and phase in your life where you're saying, I want to heal, you may be a parentified child.
Sure, but again, the parentified child is just a thought experiment.
Okay.
It's not the whole thing.
Okay. So, and in our next show, we are going to talk about extraordinary maturity.
You bet.
Dr. Jim, I want to thank you for being here. So if you're feeling stuck, feeling like you are acting, pretending to be an adult, but inside you're pretty sure that you're only about half grown up, stick around for our next show, and we thank you for being at Life Camp. And thank you for being here, Jim.
It's great to be here.
Can't wait to see our next show.